Check this out. BCM Raider here, bringing you another Commander deck tech. Today we have a Rakdos deck with Prosper, Tome bound. This is my friend's list. I want to thank him for allowing me to showcase his build. So, what we're going to be doing today with Prosper, this is a Rakdos deck, and we're going to primarily focus on generating lots of treasures and a whole bunch of spells that go into exile. That way we get every possible benefit from those spells going into exile or being played from exile. So, let's get right into it. Of course is the land base. He's got a couple swamps. He has 9 swamps. 15 mountains. There's a lot of basics in this deck. Now we have Command Tower. I love Command Tower. Now we have Rakdos Carnarium. Tainted Peak. Exotic Orchard. Shadowblood Ridge. Smoldering Marsh. Foreboding Ruins. Our pathway, which is Blight Step pathway. Spine Rock Knoll, because Spine Rock Knoll and these hideaway lands will actually exile the card. So we will be playing that card from exile. Now we have Bajuka Bog, so we can deal with our opponent's graveyards. And we have Zalfin Void. It was a pretty simple land base. If you guys have any suggestions for that land base, I would suggest possibly a Bloodstained Mire, or a Blood Crypt, or maybe a Graven Cairns as the black-red filter land. But for the most part, that's why we're here. That's why we're always learning, and we can make suggestions on how to improve. Okay, let's get into the artifacts. First up is Sol Ring. Arcane Signet, Talisman of Indulgence, Felwar Stone, a Rakdos Signet, a Mind Stone, Commander Sphere, Chaos Wand. Chaos Wand is going to be very fun because we're going to force our opponent to exile cards from their library until they exile a instant or sorcery. But we're going to cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then we put the exile cards that weren't cast on the bottom of their library. Now we have Inspiring Statuary. This will give our non-artifact spells improvise. So we're going to use our artifacts to help us cast our spells. Now we have Knowledge Pool. Knowledge Pool can be a very unfun card. But what we're doing with Knowledge Pool is we're going to benefit by putting all those cards into exile. Thus, we're going to generate a lot of treasures. And what are we going to do with all these treasures? Well, let's get into the creatures and let's see what we can do with them. First up is Kalane, Reclusive Painter. This card is very fun. When she enters, we get a treasure, but she's going to put a +1 counter on our other creatures if we use the mana from a treasure. And chances are we probably are. Now we have Reckless Fireweaver. This is going to synergize with all these treasure tokens, which are artifacts, entering the battlefield by dealing damage. So we're going to utilize treasures in a couple different ways. Either it be adding mana, dealing damage, you know, stuff like that. Okay, now we have Magnetic Chandler. We're going to use this guy to discard a card and exile the top two. There's a lot of creatures that we're running that have some kind of exile effect. That way it pairs very nicely with Prosper. Now we have Dire Fleet Daredevil. This guy was very good in Standard. And he's very good in this deck too. Because when this guy enters the battlefield, we're going to exile a instant or sorcery from your opponent's graveyard, and we're going to cast it. So we're going to get credit for casting that spell from exile. Okay, now we have Grenzo, Havoc Razor. I really like Grenzo in dealing with your opponent's board because you can control their creatures by forcing them to not attack you, but we're primarily running Grenzo for the exiling the top card. Now we have a very strong one with Valki, God of Lies. When Valki enters, we get to see our opponent's hand and we get to exile a creature card. And then Valki, if you pay the mana, it'll become a copy of the exile card. But also, what makes Valki even more insane is the fact if we cascade, we can cascade into the backside, which is Tybalt Cosmic Imposter. And for those of you who have experience in the call time standard, if you were able to basically get this guy out or kind of cheat him into play, he can win you the game just on his own. So, okay. Now we have Marionette Apprentice. This is just a 1/2 for 2 that's going to fabricate. It's going to give us a token, a servo token. But whenever another creature or artifact is put into a graveyard, such as sacrificing a treasure token, each opponent is going to lose life. Now we have Zorn. Zorn is very good in anything treasure related. So there's that. Because Zorn will double the amount of treasure tokens you create. Now we have a personal favorite with Burgi, God of Storytelling. This isn't really here for the Burgi side. It's actually more for this, which synergizes a lot better with what we're doing, which is Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, because all we have to do is discard a card, and we're going to exile the top 2 cards, and we get to play those cards. So, just when you exile the 2 cards, you're going to trigger Prosper by getting treasure tokens, and we get to cast those from exile. So that's going to be very good. And a very aggressive card is Professional Facebreaker. This guy is very good. It's a 3-drop 2/3 with Menace. Whenever one or more of our creatures deal combat damage, we're going to get a treasure token. But we can sacrifice a treasure, exiling the top card. So this is almost a replacement with Prosper. So we sacrifice the treasure, we can trigger something else, we're going to exile the top card, yada yada. We're going to play that card, and we're just going to get another treasure token from Prosper, which is absolutely insane. And because we're creating lots of tokens, there's Academy Manufacturer. This guy is going to pay us off very well for all these treasure tokens that we're creating. Because whenever we create one, this guy is going to create a clue token, a food token, or a treasure. But he's going to give us one of each. So we're going to have all these random artifacts lying around to do stuff with. Now we have Layla, the Blade Reforged. This is a very powerful card. Because whenever she attacks, we get to exile the top card. We can play that card. I'm starting to see a theme here. Hopefully you guys are too. Whenever you exile one or more cards from your library or graveyard, Layla gets bigger by putting +1 counters on it. Now we have a very, very powerful card with Mayhem Devil. This guy is going to be solely responsible for throwing around so much damage by whenever we sacrifice anything, primarily all these treasure tokens. So there's that. Now we have Bone Crusher Giant. The adventure cards, the Cascade mechanic, are all going to be very beneficial in this deck because those will count as playing them from exile. Because the adventure is a separate exile zone. So if we cast, the stomp side by dealing 2 damage, and then we cast the Bone Crusher Giant as a creature, it'll be technically cast from exile. And within that, we have Murderous Rider, just to destroy a creature or planeswalker. But a 2/3 with lifelink that when it dies, it goes on the bottom of the library. That's very powerful. Okay, getting back into the treasure synergies, we have Storm Kiln Artist. This guy is very powerful with any kind of artifact theme, but because we're going to be producing so many treasures all the time, it's going to be crazy. He's just going to get very big very quickly. Now we have Grim Hireling. He's going to produce us more treasures, but we can use those treasures to give a creature -X/-X. So we can deal with our opponent's creatures by sacrificing treasures. Now we have Breaches. Good old goblin monkey looking dude. He's a 3/3 with Menace. But whenever him or more pirates deal damage to our opponents, we're going to exile the top card of each opponent's library, and we can cast those, which is pretty good. Now we have Chaos Chandler. As far as the Baldur's Gate Dungeons and Dragons set, I haven't played too much with those cards. A lot of benefit from it, especially with this guy, because all 3 of them, we're going to exile the top card, and the higher the dice roll is, the more cards we're going to exile. Next, we have Wild Magic Sorcery. The first spell you cast from exile will have Cascade. So, because mostly all of the spells we're casting are from exile, more than likely all of our spells are going to have Cascade, which is amazing. Now we have Fathom Fleet Swordjack. He's a pirate, so he synergizes with breaches as well. But whenever this guy attacks, it deals damage to the player or planeswalker equal to the number of artifacts we control. So this guy, we're going to be dealing a lot of damage. Now we have a personal favorite of mine with Gonti, Lord of Luxury. I love this guy. This guy is the original trendsetter of we're going to exile from your opponent's library and be able to cast it. And he's a 2/3 with Death Touch. So he blocks well. Now we have Tectonic Giant. This guy's very powerful too. Whenever he attacks or becomes the target, we can either deal 3 damage to each opponent or exile the top 2 cards of our library and we can play one of them, which all synergizes with Prosper, because that's what we're doing. Now we have Decadent Dragon. This is another adventure card, but with the expensive taste side, we get to exile the top 2 cards of our opponent's library, and we can cast them for as long as they remain exiled. Basically, this is like a dragon mixed with Gonti, which is pretty cool. But whenever Decadent Dragon attacks, assuming we cast it on the creature side, this is going to give us a treasure token, which is phenomenal. Now we have a vampire with Fiend of the Shadows. This guy's cool. We can sacrifice a human to regenerate it, but more times than not, he's only here for dealing combat damage, and when we do, we get to exile a card from our opponent's hand, and we can cast or play that card as long as it remains exiled. Within the recent years, ever since Gonti, Lord of Luxury, has been printed, it's been a very popular effect. So we're seeing that type of effect being printed on a lot more different cards. Okay, now we have Keeper of Secrets. This is a first strike with haste with a Symphony of Pain. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, it'll deal damage to any opponent we want. And more times than not, we're not going to be casting things from our hand. Okay, now we have Oblivion Sower. This guy is very powerful. But when we cast this guy, we get to exile the top 4 cards of our opponent's library. And we can put any number of lands that were in exile under our control. So if we're going to constantly hit our opponent and exile cards from their library, chances are we're going to have a decent amount of lands. So when we cast Oblivion Sower, we're going to steal most of their lands. Okay, now we have Marionette Master. This guy is really fun. Yes, he can be a combo piece, but we're not really focused on that. When he enters, we get to fabricate 3, which means we could either put 3 counters on this or make 3 servo tokens. Most of the time, we're just going to do the servo tokens because they're artifacts that we can sacrifice. But whenever a artifact is put into a graveyard, our opponent is going to lose life equal to Marionette Master's power. So most of the time, its power will be 1. But in the off chance we make Marionette Master bigger, our opponents are going to be losing life really quickly, which is phenomenal. Okay, now we have the OG big-ass dinosaur himself with Atali. Yes, I do know the newer Atali is very powerful, but there's nothing wrong with the original Atali Primal Storm. This Atali is going to do what we want it to do just when this thing attacks, because it's going to exile the top card from each player's library, and we get to cast those. So, well, that was all the creatures. Let me know what y'all thought about that. We do have a couple enchantments. First up is Share the Spoils. Whenever Share the Spoils enters the battlefield, or a opponent loses the game, we get to exile the top card of each player's library. And we can basically play that land or cast that spell. So, because Commander is a multiplayer format, if you knock out one opponent, you're still going to have other opponents, and you're going to benefit. Now we have Theater of Horrors. This card is pretty cool because every single upkeep, we get to exile the top card of our library, and during that turn, if a opponent lost life, you can play lands and cast spells. Or you can just pay 4 mana to deal 1 damage to ensure that will go off. Okay, now we have Valakut Exploration. This is a fun one. This will trigger every time a land enters the battlefield, and when it does, we get to exile the top card. We get to play that for as long as it remains exiled. There are many, many of these effects in this deck, and we're going to benefit from every single one of them. But at the beginning of your end step, if there are cards exiled with Valakut, they go into the graveyard, and then Valakut Exploration is going to deal that much damage to each opponent. So we're going to benefit from these cards being exiled. Okay, now we have Outpost Siege. This is going to be very, very beneficial for us. We're going to choose the con side. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card. Yada yada. Very similar to the other one. Now we have Visions of Phyrexia. This is another, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card, and you may play that. The difference with this is going to give us a tap Power Stone token if we didn't play a card from exile this turn. So, in the off turns where we're not casting something, we'll get some kind of benefit from it. Now we have a battle with Invasion of Kaldheim. There we go. Okay. Battles are kind of like newer enchantments, per se. But a opponent will gain control of this, even though we own it. And it's going to have counters on it. counters can go up, counters can go down on sieges, but as long as we're dealing damage to it, what this does is when Invasion of Call Time enters, we exile all cards from our hand, then we draw that many. Until end of turn, we can play the cards that were exiled. So, that seems really good with Prosper. So, that was the enchantments. Let me know what y'all thought about that. Now we have some sorceries. First up is Vandal Blast. I love Vandal Blast. 1 mana, destroy a artifact. 5 mana, destroy all your opponent's artifacts. It's pretty good. We're going to want a very splashy X spell with all these treasure tokens. And what better one than I can think of than Exsanguinate. Your opponents are going to lose a lot of life. We're going to gain a lot of life. Because we're going to have a lot of mana. Now we have Wren's Resolve. This is just pay 2, exile the top 2. We may play those cards. Within that, we have Light Up the Stage. It's the same effect for 3 mana, but we can play this for its spectacle cost. So we can cast that for 1 red mana if we played the spectacle. Now we have Consuming Vapors. The rebound spells are going to be very beneficial because the rebound, when it resolves the second time, it'll be coming from exile. What Consuming Vapors does is your opponent sacrifices a creature and we gain life equal to the sacrificed creature's toughness. Now we have Ignite the Future. This is a fun one because this will allow us to exile 3 cards. And this has flashback. So, but flashback will benefit us very well because we're going to put this card from the graveyard into exile that we can hopefully cast from there as well. So the chances of recasting certain flashback spells is going to be a much higher chance because we have many different ways of playing cards from exile. Now we have Fevered Suspicion. Each opponent is going to exile cards from their library until they hit a non-land card, and we can cast any number of those without paying their mana cost. And this has rebound as well. And that's very powerful. Okay. Now we have some instants. First up is Deadly Dispute. As a additional cost, we can sacrifice a artifact, like one of the many treasure tokens, to draw 2 cards, and it's going to give us a treasure token. So we can sack 1 and instantly replace that treasure token. You found some prisoners. You don't say. This is a fun one. We can destroy a artifact, or we can exile the top 3 of target opponent's library until the next turn. We can Gonti them. I'm going to start calling this effect, we're going to Gonti them. Let me know what y'all think about that term. I think it's catchy. Now we have Faithless Salvaging. Similar to Faithless Looting, all this is going to do is discard a card, then we draw a card. But this has rebound. So we're probably going to get another treasure token. Commune with Lava. This is always fun. This is just an X spell for the Ganti effect. I like that term. Now we have Rakdos Charm. Rakdos Charm is really fun. We can exile our own graveyard if we really need to. We can destroy an artifact, or if your opponents manage to create infinite tokens or has a very large board and they're at a low life total, you can just Rakdos Charm them and they're going to take a crap ton of damage. It's like, alright, I'm going to create infinite squirrel tokens. Alright, that's cool. Guess what? Rakdos Charm you. Oops. Cool. They just took infinite damage. And who doesn't want to do that? Now we have Terminate. Very simple. Just destroy a creature. It can't be regenerated. Bedevil. Same thing, except this hits a Planeswalker. Now we have Chaos Warp, because removing stuff works. Now we have Unexpected Windfall. This is just going to hedge us in producing treasure tokens early and drawing cards. Now we have Hurl Through Hell. That's a fun name. Say it with me now. No, I'm kidding. But we're going to exile a creature until the end of our turn. We can cast it. We could technically exile our own creature and get more value off that. Now we have a very classic Cascade spell from the good old Alara days with Bituminous Blast. We're going to deal 4 damage to target creature and Cascade. And cascading for 5, that's a large mana. So we're going to be able to cast something 4 or less. Now we have a Planeswalker. It's the only Planeswalker I feel is fully represented here with Chandra Torch of Defiance. I absolutely love Chandra Torch of Defiance. This was also the card of the day, if you remember. But just their +1 ability of exiling the top card every single turn, adding mana, dealing 4 damage to a creature, which in most cases is enough to deal with it. And if you get her ultimate, whenever you cast anything, you're just going to throw 5 damage around. Alright, that was pretty much the entire deck tech for Prosper Tomebound. I do want to make a couple suggestions for this deck. Let me know if you guys agree with me. First would be probably getting a couple better lands. The other would be addition of Grinning Ignis, because that's infinite red mana with Bergie. There's infinite red mana that you can use for whatever you want. Stuff like that. But if there was anything else you guys wanted to suggest for this Prosper build, let me know in the comments. I really want to hear from you guys, and I will see you guys in the next video. I appreciate everything.